Per tutti I miei giorni tu mi curerai e resterai vicino a me. Per tutti I miei giorni la tua fedeltà mi seguirà e mi guiderà. Per tutti I miei giorni tu mi curerai. Yeah.
Hi, I'm Pastor Diana, and the step of today is called the Wound of Humiliation. And let's go immediately see, do you remember the other wounds, right? Abandonment, rejection, abandonment, betrayal, injustice, and humiliation. So now we're going to see the humiliation one. Let's go see what it means. Humiliation is the action of feeling belittled, lessened, denigrated, of denigrating oneself and denigrating someone else. The synonymous of these words of this word is belittle, shame, mortification, and denigration. So the wound of humiliation has everything to do with being ashamed of oneself, being ashamed of others, belittling oneself and belittling others. Let me start with a case of denigration. This is just an example, just to make you understand. A moment where you can feel denigrated, let's say, for example, you're a young child, you're 10 years old, and mom just brought you new clothes, white clothes, and you go out to play, and you come back totally muddy. Okay, so you basically ruined mom's new clothes. And that same night, your parents had guests. So basically, you come back late, you're all dirty, you come in, your parents and your mom especially reprimands you. And they're like, no, I can't believe I just bought your clothes. Look at how dirty you are. You're like a pig, or whatever their ignorance might say. Because sometimes, we just use words they just come out of our mouth. I mean, I hope it doesn't happen with us, but sometimes it does happen. I've heard parents say the worst things about their children. I mean, even sometimes in the supermarket, I'm thinking, oh, man, I wish I could be close to them to be able to help them out. Because we need to be wise with what we speak, because the word says that our words generate life and death. So we always have to be careful what we're talking about and how we are talking to people, especially when there are sons and daughters. So let's say these parents had guests. So the child comes in, gets reprimanded and belittled by the mother, and all of a sudden he's feeling like his mom is disgusted with him. See, that's the problem. They feel that their parents have a total disgust on them. They're not worth anything. So he goes in the other room, he starts changing, and the guests come in. If by any chance the child hears his parents lamenting themselves of this event that happened with the guests that just came in, there's even more shame, and the wound of humiliation will be even deeper. Okay, that's just to give an understanding of one of the possible cases. There could be 1,000 cases of when you have been shamed on. I don't know if you can say it, but when you've been put to shame and when you've also shamed yourself. Let's go see the mask. What is the mask of one who has the wound of humiliation? The mask is called Masochist. It's called the Masochist. And they wear this wound, they wear this sort of a band-aid, like we talked about already, to cover up the pain from this same wound. Let's go see the characteristics of a person who has the wound of humiliation, okay? I'm just going to go down the list because I didn't write this. This comes from a book of Lise Bourbeau. And so I don't want to even add or modify much, anything actually. People who have these wounds usually recount all the prohibited things that they did when they were young or adolescent. So what happens is these are the type of people that you hear that actually will tell you the story of like when they were young and they did this and they did that. And when you do have a wound of humiliation, you tend to throw yourself into situations that will humiliate you. And maybe you make fun of them, but actually it's a humiliating thing. Another characteristic, the masochist from which the mask is formed is the behavior of a person that finds satisfaction and even pleasure in suffering. There's just that characteristic where they don't mind pain in a certain way. They don't mind suffering. He seeks pain. Okay, remember that when I talk masculine, it's as if I was talking feminine as well, but I'm going to use the he. He seeks pain and humiliation in an unconscious level, in an unconscious way, and organizes himself to hurt himself and to punish himself before anybody else does. Okay, so unconsciously he goes looking for pain because probably he thinks he deserves it. The wound of humiliation is triggered also by what he does and what he doesn't do, what he has and what he doesn't have. Okay, so for example, you're really poor. Okay, so you don't have, and you're around people who have a lot. You're gonna feel humiliated, and maybe your family was really poor in a neighborhood that was really that was on the side of a really rich, and I don't know if this is possible, but actually in São Paulo they have all the favelas and near other places. So, and it's the really poor, and maybe then you have the rich, not maybe close, but semi-close. So this wound is triggered by what you do and what you don't do, what you have and what you don't have. Maybe everybody else could afford jeans and you couldn't. Or everybody else had new shoes and you didn't. And that's really humiliating, especially when you grow up, because little kids, boy, it's tough growing up because everybody's like beating on everybody else, emotionally speaking. Let's go look at another characteristic. Let's go see the physical part. The physical part of a person who has the humiliation wound, he has a rounded body, okay, and quite large. The physical description of the mask of the masochist, from the moment that the person believes that he is less important than somebody else, he will develop a thick layer of fat of which he will be ashamed of, which is really absurd because you're already humiliated, but you will form, because of this wound, a layer of fat by which you will even feel more humiliated. And that's the truth. And there's a difference between a body who's fat and a body who's full of muscle. Because there are some men who are, they're big and they're full of muscle, but that's not the case. In the case of this wound, the person is actually fat. And it is true that if you have a really strong self-discipline, I've seen people who have this wound who have been able to lose weight, but they have to continually just really struggle with keeping their weight because their tendency is just to accumulate a fat protection, which will then put shame on themselves or bring shame on themselves. If only a body part, though, is fat and round, for example, the stomach or the bottom or the breasts, that indicates, if it's only one part, it indicates that the wound is not that deep. Okay, so it's a good sign. If the whole body, though, is big and rounded and everything is kind of rounded and big, it means that it's a deeper wound. Often, he has other physical characteristics. Okay, listen to these. Short in stature, a fat and large neck, he's tense at the neck, at the throat, at the jaws, on the sides, and often he has a round face with big open eyes, innocent, like a baby. The masochist will often compensate all his problems with food. So he's using food to try and sort things out, but it's actually going against him. It's basically his anchor of salvation. He thinks, okay, I'm going to eat and I'm going to feel okay. But it doesn't happen that way, because he eats and he feels even worse about himself because he's gained weight. When he learns to gratify himself in another way, then food won't become his compensation anymore. So if you think you have this wound, try and gratify yourself and give yourself pleasure and be happy about something, not by eating, but something else. Take yourself to the movies, go out with Jesus, or go out to, I love it when I'm happy, I go out and get a cappuccino. And I drink a cappuccino. I love that. I love cappuccios. Of course, you have a Starbucks with frappuccino and everything. So, of all the wounds, okay, this is very hard to understand. Of all the wounds, this one is the hardest to recognize. So if you have it, you're probably going to think, I don't have it. But that's why you have to be careful and look at your body, because often when your body has those kind of characteristics, it's very possible, it's not a must, but it's a big might that you might have this wound. And some people who have this wound aren't able to acknowledge it. And if you're not able to acknowledge it, you're not able to heal it. That's the problem. So ask God to help you see this. To become more aware of the wound of humiliation, you have to ask yourself a couple questions. You have to understand, until what point have you felt ashamed of yourself? Until what point have you felt ashamed of the people around you, maybe your parents, maybe your friends, maybe your boyfriend? And how many people also have felt ashamed of you? Because if there's a lot of shame in your life, there's a big indication that this could be the type of wound that you're coming from. Another way to understand that you have this wound is to observe that this person, basically, who has this wound, will take on responsibilities and errands and tasks of other people. So usually he's just very helpful. That's another signal to understand. The people who have a wound of humiliation become very efficient and take on their shoulders many responsibilities. And that's why usually their back is thick and they can carry heavy burdens. It's not my case, but thank God. I mean, I have the abandonment wound, so each one has theirs. But their back is thick, so that they will it's a way to physically show, okay, I'm going to take on my responsibility and your responsibility. So the masochist also has this gift of putting himself in situations where he will help others. And by doing so, he totally forgets about himself. So he's totally projected outwards. The more he takes on other people's issues, the more he gains weight. That's a matter of fact. Every time that the masochist seems to want to help others, in reality, he wants to create commitment and obligations. And I'm going to tell you why later on, because it deals with the biggest fear of the masochist. But let's go on. The masochist doesn't realize that by doing everything for somebody else, they not only put to shame themselves, but they belittle the other person. Why? Because they're basically insinuating, you can't do anything without my help. And so you see how it goes back in a circle. Shame, shame, shame everywhere. And he humiliates them, making others feel that without him, they can't do anything. When the masochist will understand on a deeper level that he is a really special person, he or she, a very special person, very important person, he won't feel the need to demonstrate it to others. Recognizing himself, it won't be necessary then for his body to pick up so much space, because picking up space, you're showing yourself, okay, I'm here. But as soon as that happens, that you realize how important you are, and I want to add, you feel God's love, your body in automatic will start thinning out. So as you heal, you will in automatic start losing weight. Another thing is that he seems capable of keeping things under control. But it's the type of control that is actually motivated primarily from fear of being ashamed of those close to him or of himself. What do I mean by this? I mean that he is actually, he has to keep things under control. He has to keep things under control. Why? Because if he doesn't control things, he might be ashamed of the outcome. So I don't want to be ashamed of the outcome. I'm going to keep everything under control. Okay, the person with the wound of humiliation has a difficulty in expressing their real needs or feels authentically, or what they feel authentically. Because since they were a child, they didn't dare to speak about their real needs. Many times, maybe the parents, for example, the mom didn't have enough bare necessities to live, let's say food, didn't have enough food, so the child would hide the fact that maybe he really desired to eat a steak, or to have that phone that everybody else has, but he couldn't afford, so he didn't have a phone, and every other friend of his at school had maybe an iPhone, who knows. And so he has learned to keep his wants and needs for himself. The embarrassing situations of the family members that he was embarrassed about also were to be kept secret. This is another issue, is that usually these people have learned that in Italy there's a saying that says, I panni sporchi si lavano a casa propria. The dirty clothes, you wash them in your own house, okay? So you don't go around telling how terrible things are in your house. Let's say maybe you do come from a humble background and everything's really bad. You don't tell everybody else how bad your family situation is, and maybe you were ashamed of your family situation. But you've been taught to keep quiet and keep in secret. Since going back to so basically, even the primary needs, the child he's learned not to say them, because since everything is lacking, I won't say mine either, and I'll keep it, because they don't want to displease their mom by saying, oh, I really want that iPhone, or they really do want that iPhone, but they don't say it because they know that it can't work. Another characteristic is that the masochist usually is hypersensitive, and it takes little to hurt him. Consequently, he doesn't want to hurt people. Now, not wanting to hurt people is great characteristic. But being hypersensitive isn't good. Sensitive is okay. Hypersensitive, it's not okay. Him who has the wound of humiliation is, amongst the other people with other wounds, the one who doesn't give heed to their needs, even though they are aware of what they want. So, they know what they want, but they won't ask what they want. And this is part of their suffering, that they don't listen to their real needs. And a masochist is a person who hurts himself. And this wound creates the fact that you won't listen to your real needs, and so you're hurting yourself. You're not giving yourself what you need, because you've learned to suffer and you carry that out in your life. Well, I think it's great when we can listen to ourselves and say, I maybe even really need a break. I really need to rest. My body's so tired. And I take a break without feeling guilty. The masochist also inflicts on himself the suffering of, like I said before, not listening to himself, which makes the wound of humiliation grow even bigger and makes the mask even thicker, so the body. He does everything to be useful, and this is a means by which he hides the wound and believes that he isn't suffering because of humiliation. But really he is. It's just a way to trick himself. Okay, so he forgets about himself, is always helping others, and thinks that everything's okay, but really it's not. It's not okay. Whoever has this wound often, this is a big point. People who have this wound will humiliate others with words and actions and attitudes. And they won't even notice. And that's why it's so important to become aware of this wound, because you're humiliating others. And I've been a victim of people who've had this humiliation wound in them. And they don't even realize that they are, with their words, sometimes they are just they totally humiliate you. And when do they humiliate you? They humiliate you when they feel humiliated. So maybe you tell them something and they whip right back at you and just denigrate you, belittle you, they lessen you. Because that's what this wound creates. Why? Because really, really inside, they feel belittled. They feel denigrated. And so immediately they pass it on. It's like, it's like the Band-Aid. Immediately they apply this reaction. And it's terrible. With every single wound, if you don't deal with it, you will pass it on. If you've been rejected, you're going to reject. If you've been abandoned, you're going to abandon, etc., etc. He does everything. Yes, I said this already. Often the masochist is acknowledged for his capacity of making others laugh by making fun of himself. So he will pick himself as a target, and he will pick on himself and make fun of himself to make everybody laugh. How many people have we seen who have this characteristic? And they're really funny. But behind making everybody laugh and behind their funny words, they are hiding a wound of humiliation, because actually they feel humiliated, but they joke about their being ashamed of themselves, and they pass it on to others. The masochist has a gift of punishing himself before anyone else will. He will give himself the first beating so that the beatings of others won't be so painful. And this is interesting. For example, this is a type of person who wants to absolutely know what's wrong in their life before everybody else knows what is wrong. So they want to find out what's wrong, correct it, beat themselves for it, try to modify so that when the outside world, first of all, if they are able to modify it, it won't bring shame to his life. And if they're not able to modify, at least they give themselves the first beating, and so the beatings from outside don't seem so painful. That's why it's called the masochist, because it brings a lot of suffering to the person, and it's all in an unconscious level. They don't really realize. He has such difficulty in gratifying himself that when he feels pleasure in an activity or with someone, nearly always he will accuse himself of taking advantage of it. So he won't even be able to really take pleasure in what brings him pleasure. The sense of duty is very important to a person who has a wound of humiliation. He often finds himself an intermediary. Yeah, I think it's called like that. It's when you stand between two people and you help them make peace. So he's often going to be in that kind of role that helps two people figure things out. Lise Bourbeau would say that it's important to remember that others can't ever make us feel guilty, because feeling guilty can only come from inside. And that is just so amazing. I love this phrase. Memorize it. It's important to remember that nobody can make us feel guilty, because the sense of guilt only comes from the inside. Now, I want to say that there are 3 ways of an underlying current. I don't know if I said this in another step. Bear with me in case I did. But people can be fearful, or feel worthless, or feel guilty. That's the 3 underlying currents that all people have. Or they feel fearful, or they feel worthless, or they feel guilty. Now, you can analyze your life and see which one is an underlying current for me. Is it that I always feel guilty about stuff? Is it that I always have just a little fear in my life? Or is it that I just don't feel worthy enough? That's just for you to think on. And it has nothing to do with this wound. Liberty is very important to the masochist. For him, being free means that he doesn't have to have accountability and not be controlled by anyone and do what he wants to do. When he was a child, the masochist never felt free, especially with his parents. So what is the biggest fear of a person who has a wound of humiliation? The biggest fear is liberty, free time. You can do what you want because they're not used to it, to being free. So he thinks he really won't be able to handle his liberty. So unconsciously, he will do what's possible to not have any free time. And it's usually always his choice to do so. He will fill his agenda. These are people who will always have an agenda, and they go to have a vacation, and 3 days pass, they're already working. They're doing something, they're organizing. As long as they don't have free time, and as long as they don't have liberty, they feel secure. He thinks that by deciding alone, he won't be controlled by others. Basically, he's saying, if I fill my agenda, it won't be others filling my agenda. I will do it myself. But in these decisions, he will accumulate more commitments and more obligations also towards others. Wanting to care for everybody he loves, he thinks he has freedom because it's him who keeps everything under control. But in reality, he's putting himself in prison. That's a reality. Another citation from Lise Bourbeau says this: it's important to remember that it's not what you live that will make you suffer, but the reaction to what you live, due to the wounds that you haven't healed. And I'm going to repeat this because it's really important. It's important to remember that it's not what you live that will make you suffer. It's not the event in itself that will make you suffer, but the reaction to what you live, due to your past wounds that haven't healed. So let's also remember, like we said before, that the glasses of the filter of whatever wound you have will make you see everything through that wound. And so every event, maybe for me, it's not a big issue. For you who have a wound of humiliation, it's this huge, huge event, and so you suffer and I don't, and it's the same event we lived. How many times in a house, maybe there's something bad that happens, 2 children react totally in different ways. One is maybe stronger and more okay. The other, maybe who already had a bigger wound to begin with, becomes a catastrophe. Maybe they go out, they become a drug addicts or whatever it may be. Why? Because we don't all perceive the same event in the same way. And perspective is just this wonderful thing, because let's say an event is here if you're here, or if you're here, or if you're here, it totally changes the perspective. So you're going to be seeing the same event with a totally different, no, wait, there were these, and that person says, no, it was like this and this, and that person says, no, it was like this and this. And it's all true. All three of them are true. And depending on how you filter and how you see things, you will perceive the same event in different ways. Let's also remember that the cause of the wounds comes from the incapacity of forgiving yourself for doing and making the same mistakes, i.e. denigrating other people, belittling other people. And I'm going to conclude, of course then we're going to pray, by also saying that we have to remember that the mask of the masochist that is applied on the wound of humiliation is not always present, okay? Because you're not always in contact with the wound, but when you are in contact with the wound, the mask is there. So you might wear this mask sometimes for a couple minutes, sometimes for a week, and sometimes instead for months and a whole lifetime if it's really, really deep and you haven't dealt with it at all. So I want to pray together, because I believe that God can do all things. And God, I pray in Jesus' name that you will bring up to the conscious level whoever has this hurt and this wound. And I pray that you would give them eyes to see their past and to be able to understand how father and mother treated them, and how they maybe treated themselves, and how they treated others, or how kids at school treated them. And I pray that you would help them out. I pray that you were humiliated. You were humiliated. You were beaten, Jesus. You were oppressed. You were crucified on the cross. You were naked while you were dying. And I believe that your humiliation can heal our humiliation. So I pray that through your wounds, your humiliation wounds, I pray that you would come into empathy with everyone who has this wound, making them feel loved, making them feel accepted, making them feel important, making them feel special, and reminding them and telling them in their ear that you can heal them, because you are the God of all things. And I pray you would act in their hearts and do something special in their life for this wound. And I pray it in Jesus' name. Amen. Amen. Finish this step, we go on to the next one. Ciao and arrivederci, like we say in Italy. Ciao ciao.
Tutti I miei giorni tu mi curerai e resterai vicino a me. Per tutti I miei giorni la tua fedeltà mi seguirà e mi guiderà. Per tutti I miei giorni tu mi curerai. Yeah.